Hi there, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is: will we allow neoliberal politicians to crash the economy again? Part 3. Yes, we keep on discussing this. We keep on discussing the debt ceiling crisis. You all know by now, I suppose, that a deal was struck. Joe Biden struck a deal with Kevin McCarthy, and they're trying to push this deal through the Congress. There's very little time left before Janet Yellen says that the Treasury spending account is going to go down to nothing, and that we will be facing a default. Anyway, they made a deal. There are reactions to the deal. We're going to go through some of the reactions. My own view is that just because they made a deal, that doesn't mean that we or the Congress should accept it. I'm going to address the question of whether Congress should accept it. Of course, the overriding reason why they should accept it is that if they were to accept it, the debt ceiling crisis would be over. The Treasury Department would be able to borrow again, and that means we would be able to pay all of the creditors of the federal government. All of the beneficiaries of federal programs, all of the holders of debt instruments, whose principal, is falling due, and the full faith and credit of the United States would be upheld. That's the overriding reason we should accept it. However, the question is, if the deal were rejected, would we in fact actually default? Or are there other things the executive branch could do by itself to prevent a default? Are there other things that the executive branch could do immediately or almost immediately to head off a default if this deal failed to pass the Congress? Now, first I have to start off by recognizing there are 105 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. There are 50 members of the Freedom Caucus. Even if all of them were to vote against this deal, which they are all reputed to be unhappy about, that would be 155 votes. However, there are perhaps 25 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus who are perhaps not so unhappy with this deal. They claim to be progressives, but are not. There may be more than the 25. It may be there are only 50 progressives who are very, very unhappy with this deal. Of course, they'll be under tremendous pressure to conform. So let's look at the range and say that there might be 25 of the Freedom Caucus that would vote against it, and 50 of the progressives if they had their druthers. That's only 75 votes. So the deal passes anyway. But let's assume again that every CPC member votes against it and every Freedom Caucus member votes against it. That's only 155 votes against it. So the deal still passes. So, how do we get rid of this deal? How do we force the Biden administration to torpedo the deal and go with other alternatives that they can go with? And why would we want them to do that? We would want them to do that because this deal is a bad deal for many of the people of the United States. It's another one of these bipartisan deals that picks the pockets of those who cannot afford that. And we will see this as we go over some articles that are complaining about this deal, okay, already. So I'm going to shift to some of those. Let us start to, I'm going to share some of those, starting with a piece from Common Dreams. Okay, this piece appeared on May 28th, 2 days ago. It's by Jake Johnson. Okay, progressives condemn Biden GOP debt ceiling deal as, quote, cruel and short-sighted, unquote. And a quote from the article: for no real reason at all, hungry people are set to lose food while tax cheats get a free pass, unquote. Update: the text of the legislation, titled the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023, is now available here. There's a link to it, okay, and you can use it. I have read the text of the legislation, but I won't be directly going over that with you. I'm going to rely on treatments here and treatments by Dave Dayen, okay, and another analysis over at The Nation, in order to characterize these. Anyway, progressive economists and advocates warned that the tentative debt ceiling agreement reached Saturday by the White House and Republican leaders would needlessly gash nutrition aid, rental assistance, education programs, and more, all while making it easier for the wealthy to avoid taxes. The deal, which now must win the support of both chambers of Congress, reportedly includes 2 years of caps on non-military federal spending, sparing a Pentagon budget replete with staggering waste and abuse. One reason why this deal should be rejected. I want to add something else here. Today, I was reading another piece on what's going on with the climate. It is now expected that we will breach the 1.5 Celsius rise in temperature, from which it is projected that the climate emergency is really going to bite, and that will happen in the next 2 to 4 years. And the federal government has yet to start on serious efforts to meet the climate emergency, and this deal provides 2 years of caps on non-military federal spending, while the world is literally going to hell. That's how bad this deal is. We can't afford caps on spending. The Congress has to be free to spend whatever is necessary to meet the emergencies that are about to face us. Having caps on spending right now is ridiculous. It is so much against the public purpose, I cannot even begin to describe that. The Associated Press reported that the deal would, quote, hold spending flat for 2024 and increase it by 1% for 2025, unquote. Not keeping pace with inflation, even. The agreement would also impose new work requirements on some recipients of SNAP food benefits and also TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, while scaling back recently approved IRS funding, a gift to rich tax cheats, because they can get away with cheating because the IRS enforcement capability that was recently approved in Congress is going to be cut back. I am now being joined by Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. And
Hello.
so she is here to help out. We just got through with her program where we discussed some interesting Middle East developments. We won't go into those now, but anyway, it is a very good show, and I recommend that you pick up on the recording. So, Dee, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, I am in the middle of going through an article from Common Dreams about how bad this debt ceiling deal is. What I'm going through various reactions by way of proving that we should not be sitting back and accepting this deal. We should be jamming Joe Biden as much as we can and also trying to create momentum in Congress to defeat this deal. Why should we defeat it? We need to defeat it because, for the reasons I'm going to go through, it's a hugely bad deal. But furthermore, it's a deal we cannot afford because of all the things we have to do. Okay, and it's also a deal that doesn't have to be made in order to head off a default, because there are other things the Treasury can immediately do to head off a default that Treasury could be doing right now.
Exactly.
They could be doing right now. Okay, now Kay, I know that Kay has a personal interest here. She's expecting a Social Security check on June 3rd. Okay, Kay, I think your Social Security check is still going to go through, and I say that because uh, what Yellen has to say about the date when Treasury runs out of money is that it's going to be June 5th. And I believe that your check is going to be there by then. So I just want to say that because I think Kay has, of course, very serious personal interest in her check getting there on time for her. But going back to the Common Dreams article, uh, the agreement would impose new work requirements on some recipients of SNAP benefits and also TANF while scaling back recently approved IRS funding, a give to rich tax cheats. In exchange for the spending cuts and work requirements, The Republican leaders have agreed to lift the debt ceiling until January 1st, 2025. In other words, allow the federal government to continue borrowing until January 1st of 2025, a trade-off that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is pitching as a victory to his caucus, which includes far-right members who have demanded more aggressive austerity. President Joe Biden, for his part, called the deal, quote, a compromise, which means not everyone gets what they want, unquote. That's not the issue. The issue is whether people got what they needed to get. One thing the president needed to get, in my view, was he needed to free the hostage. He hasn't freed the hostage. The hostage situation will manifest itself again on January 1st, 2025. If he or another Democrat should win in 2024, the hostage taking begins again on January 1st, 2025, because this guy, Joe Biden, didn't have the guts to free the hostage now. Well, what if Kevin McCarthy didn't want to agree? Again, there's no need, there has been no need to negotiate with the Republicans. The Democrats had tools to ride roughshod over them, and they should have done that. They had tools to free the hostage without any negotiating with them at all. Lindsay Owens, executive director of the Groundwork Collaborative, said in a statement Saturday night that, quote, this is a punishing deal, made worse only by the fact that there was no reason for President Biden to negotiate with Speaker McCarthy over whether or not the United States government should pay its bills, alluding to the president's executive authority. Quote, after inflation eats its share, flat funding will result in fewer households accessing rental assistance, fewer kids in Head Start, and fewer services for seniors, unquote, said Owens. Quote, the deal represents the worst of conservative budget ideology. It cuts investments in workers and families, adds onerous and wasteful new hurdles for families in need of support, and protects the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations from paying their fair share in taxes, unquote. The agreement comes days before the U.S. is, according to the Treasury Department, set to run out of money to pay its obligations, imperiling Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid payments, and potentially hurling the entire global economy into chaos. As we'll see, this is inaccurate. Yes, the Treasury Department is within a few days of running out of money if it refuses to break the debt ceiling and to issue more debt. But there is nothing stopping it from doing that. Well, you might say, well, what's stopping it is the law of the land, that if they don't obey the law of the land, they will be sued and the case will be brought up to the Supreme Court, which will force them to obey the law of the land. Over the last few sessions here, we've been through arguments which suggest that the debt ceiling law is not the law of the land, but is unconstitutional, certainly unconstitutional. I want to, without going away from this, I don't want to stop sharing this and come back, but I'm going to read the abstract from Bob Hockett's A Complaint Template for Legal Challenges to the Validity of the Statutory Debt Ceiling. Okay, the abstract says, and of course I've gone through the whole thing with you at length in earlier streams, the statutory debt ceiling appearing at 31 U.S. Code 3101B, rooted in this the Second Liberty Bond Act of 1917, aimed at expanding Treasury financing options during the First World War is not valid in any application that would occasion default on U.S. sovereign debt, other contractual obligations, or Social Security or veterans' pension obligations. There are at least 7 mutually enforcing legal grounds for so saying. These include preemption of such application of the ceiling by the comprehensive and painstakingly detailed Congressional Budget and Empowerment Control Act of 1974, 31 of the U.S. Code, sections 1301 et sec, pursuant to both the later in time rule and the lex specialis canon, the separation of powers, the take care clause of the Constitution, the presentment clause of the Constitution, and the 14th Amendment debt clause found in our Constitution, the 14th Amendment, Section 4, and the absurd result canon preempting applications of law that could not have been legislatively intended. Bob Pocket goes on in this abstract. This complaint template is accordingly offered for use by any Social Security or veterans pension beneficiary and Treasury debt holder and any other contractual creditor of the United States who claims might be imperiled by debt ceiling gamesmanship in the U.S. Congress. With any luck, a stampede of lawsuits in federal court might force the restoration of statesmanship and responsibility to both Congress and the White House. Well, that last part of it we can ignore for now. What I wanted to point out to you was all of the various reasons outlined here in one sentence, essentially, all of the various reasons why the debt ceiling law can be rejected as the law of the land, why the president, under his authority, can reject it as the law of the land and can order Janet Yellen to proceed with further issuance of debt instruments. If Yellen and Biden do that, there will be no default. Yes, the Republicans may try to bring this up again in the Supreme Court. They may try. But they will not succeed. Most probably, they will not succeed. But let us say they did succeed. Let's say the Republicans got standing, which problem I've raised in previous streams. And let's say the Supreme Court made one of its wild and crazy decisions and decided in favor of the Republicans, in favor of the debt ceiling law. Then what would happen? Well, while all this was going on, and if the case looks like it's going bad, what the president and the Treasury Secretary could do is to mint the platinum coin with a face value high enough to at least spend the rest of the budget for this fiscal year and to repay all the debt that is due this fiscal year. They could do that as a backup while the case is proceeding through the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court should happen to decide against the executive branch, then what the executive branch can do is to start to use the $1 trillion or hopefully the $100 trillion that they got from the coin to continue to pay down the budgetary appropriations, continue to spend the budgetary appropriations and pay down the debt due this fiscal year. So the payments would continue. At first, continuation of payments would be due to issuing further debt. But if the court rules against it, then the payments could continue by using the money that was placed in the Treasury spending account. So there would be no default for some time to come, even if the Supreme Court were to reject, however, the platinum coin and to tell the secretary that it couldn't issue any more platinum coins. I'm sure the Supreme Court would not order that the Treasury give back any of the revenue that it got from the platinum coin. That would be too dangerous in crashing the world economy. The Supreme Court doesn't want to be responsible for crashing the world economy. It's in enough trouble as it is. It doesn't want to risk the impeachment of every damn Supreme Court justice. But even if it does rule that the issuance of the $1 trillion coin was, or the $100 trillion coin was unconstitutional, at that point it can do little except to put an injunction in and say the Treasury can do no more of this. But even then, Biden has an option. He has the option to issue consols, perpetual bonds, having no principal value. And there can be no challenge to these because the executive branch has the right to issue. It's plain in the law. Has the right to issue whatever securities they deem are necessary to keep going. The only securities that are subject to the debt ceiling law are those that have a principal value. Consols would not have a principal value that has to be paid back. Only interest would have to be paid back. So there would be no breach of the debt ceiling law if consols were used. So even if the other two options failed, the console option can't be challenged in the Supreme Court on any half reasonable basis. It is there as a final backup for the executive branch. But even this is not a final backup. The final backup, as I said in previous streams, is for Joe Biden to simply say, the Supreme Court has made its decision. Now let them enforce it. I would not necessarily like to create such a constitutional crisis if I were president. But also, if I were president, I would realize that the arbitrary power of the Supreme Court, without any checks from the other branches, has gone too far. And it has to stop. And the only way for it to stop is for Congress and or the executive branch to put a stop to it by refusing to enforce a court order of the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court finally invalidates consoles as a security in a completely arbitrary way, I don't even think it could do that. But if it even tried to do that, that is the last resort of an executive who does not want to default. But it is a power that Biden has. Now, my contention here is that we among the public should be trying to torpedo Biden's compromise, knowing that he has recourse to other tools to stop any interruption in the flow of money. And what our job should be is to force him as best we can to use these other tools, which are much superior to the compromise he has made. Let's go on with how that compromise is going to harm people. House Republicans have leveraged those alarming possibilities to secure painful federal spending cuts and aid program changes that could leave more people hungry, sick, and unable to afford housing, critics said. For no real reason at all, hungry people are set to lose food while tax cheats get a free pass, wrote Angela Hanks, chief of programs, at Demos, which is a think tank, one of the more progressive think tanks in Washington. While the legislative text has not yet been released, well, the update says it has been released. And as I told you before, I've read the text of the debt ceiling deal. The deal would reportedly impose work requirements it does on adult SNAP recipients without dependents up to the age of 54, increasing the current age limit of 49. Policy analysts and anti hunger activists have long decried SNAP time limits and work uh, uh, requirements as immoral and ineffective at boosting employment. Most adult SNAP recipients already work. Quote, the SNAP changes are nominally extending work requirements to ages 50 to 54. It turns out, by the way, that's going to be only in the second year of the compromise. In the first year, it's going to stop at 49. In reality, especially as the new rule is implemented, this is just an indiscriminate cull of a bunch of 50 to 54-year-olds from SNAP who won't realize there are new forms they need to fill out, unquote.
Joe.
Yeah,
Excuse me. On Facebook it says you lost audio. Russell Goldman said
on
right now at
Facebook.
9:33. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what I can do about that. Did I lose audio on YouTube?
No, I hear you.
Okay, I think
I don't
others.
see anybody complaining. And
Okay,
but let me
if
see.
Russell lost audio, I think. But could you check me out, on Facebook D and see
Okay.
whether Facebook is projecting the audio? Oh,
Oh
Russell
no,
says
he said.
it was
Yeah.
on my end. Pardon that.
Okay.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's what I thought too. I didn't think it was likely Facebook lost audio. Uh, okay, so I was talking about uh, uh, 50 to 54-year-olds from SNAP who won't realize there are new forms they need to fill out. Unquote. That was a quote from Matt Brunig, the founder of the People's Policy Project. And Diane Yentl, president and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, wrote on Twitter that the agreement is, quote, cruel and short sighted, pointing to the work requirements and real term cuts to rental assistance during an already worsening homeless crisis, unquote. Quote, House R's held our nation's lowest income people hostage in exchange for lifting the ceiling, unquote. That's what the Republicans do. Yentl continued. Quote, the debt ceiling deal, quote unquote, could lead to tens of thousands of families losing rental assistance, expanding ineffective work requirements, and putting time limits on food assistance adds salt to the wound, further harming some of the lowest income and most marginalized people in our country, unquote. The White House and Republican leaders also reportedly agreed to some permitting reforms, and climate groups have slammed as a boon for the fossil fuel industry. According to the New York Times, the agreement includes measures meant to speed environmental reviews of certain energy projects, unquote, though the scope of the changes is not yet clear. Uh, it'll be clarified in some of the other articles we're going through. And while the deal doesn't appear to include a repeal of Biden's student debt cancellation plan, which is currently before the Supreme Court, it does reportedly contain a provision that would cement the end of the student loan repayment pause, drawing fury from debt relief campaigners. By the way, it does contain that. It does contain that. It ends the pause. Resuming student debt payments will crush working families and is simply bad policy, but agreeing to codify the pause's end into law before the Supreme Court decides on broad scale relief is criminal. It is criminal. Jeff Stein, this was a quote tweet from something Jeff Stein said. The agreement, as I understand it, codifies into law the administration's existing plan to end forbearance. Theoretically, if there's another emergency, they could again enact a moratorium. By the way, the article I saw today on the climate, the same article that said we have only about 2 years to do something serious before we get to 1.5 Celsius, also points out that we do have a climate emergency. Why doesn't this administration declare the climate emergency so more power goes to the executive to do something about the climate emergency? What the hell is wrong with Joe Biden? The deal must now get through Congress, a difficult task given potentially significant opposition from progressive lawmakers who are against the tax on aid programs and Republicans who want steeper cuts. Well, I gave you a little count at the beginning of this particular stream. There are not enough votes from the progressive lawmakers and the Freedom Caucus to defeat this compromise if Democrats join the Republicans, or let's put it this way, if establishment Democrats join the McCarthy Republicans in supporting this particular compromise. There are only 155 votes there that are negative. Now, I wouldn't be saying torpedo the bill if I didn't think it could be done. But I think the way it has to be done is through a loud outcry from the public and momentum building in Congress, because there are or might be 155 lawmakers or 100 lawmakers who are adamantly opposed to this program. That may at least convince some in the Senate to step forward and block this compromise. But everybody has to clearly understand that blocking this compromise jams Biden up and forces him to do the alternatives that I earlier reported. What we'd be doing here is jamming Biden to do what he should have done in the first place, was not to negotiate with the Republicans and to use his other tools to stop a default. As the Times reported, quote, lawmakers in the House Freedom Caucus were privately pillorying the deal on Saturday night, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus had already begun to fume about it even before negotiators finalized the agreement. Amy Hanauer, executive director of the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, and the wife, of Nick Hanauer, a progressive billionaire, said Sunday that, quote, it's a relief to see that congressional leaders and the president have come to an agreement to raise the debt limit and avert an economic disaster. Then she goes on, quote, but by instituting work requirements for critical assistance programs and rescinding important funding to crack down on wealthy tax cheats, this deal will rig the economy even more in favor of the most well-off Americans, while failing to fix the real structural problems that led to the current debt crisis in the first place, unquote, said Hanover. Quote, the deal avoids the elephant in the room, It includes no new revenues, even though tax cuts of the past few decades were a primary driver of deficit growth. By the way, there's nothing wrong, with deficit growth, as I think we all agree here. Quote, and next up, many Republican lawmakers want to double down on tax cuts by pushing through many more tax cuts that would most help wealthy families and corporations. Hanauer added, quote, they should do the opposite. One billionaire is on our side. The next piece that I want to share is one from The Nation. Let me get that up. Usually The Nation gives one difficulties. Okay, here it is. Oh, this is by Jamie. Didn't even realize this was by Jamie. So, of course, he's one of my very favorite economists. So, I'm going to share that. Jamie Galbraith, of course, I was referring to. The debt deal is a tragedy. The debt limit agreement entrenches long-term austerity. It was a huge GOP win, contrary to what Biden says. Okay. There's a picture of Biden and Kevin McCarthy. Two men emerged from the Oval Office, says Jamie Galbraith. One of them, President Joe Biden, said of the deal they just reached that it, quote, reduces spending while protecting critical programs for working people and growing the economy for everyone. The other, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, said that the deal will bring historic reductions in spending, consequential reforms that will lift people out of poverty into the workforce, rein in government overreach. Contrary to the president, the deal will not, quote, grow the economy, unquote. Contrary to the speaker, it will not, quote, lift people out of poverty. So says one of the leading economists in the country, Jamie Galbraith. It spares the military, veterans, Social Security, and Medicare, focusing cuts and caps on non-defense discretionary spending, which, as the Center for American Progress has explained, includes many of the most essential programs, quote unquote. Those cuts accumulate, and as population grows and prices rise, they will be steep. True, the spending caps apply for only 10 years, but then the debt ceiling will come up again, and they will likely be renewed. That's in Jamie's judgment at that time. I don't know whether they will be renewed or not. In part, it's probably going to depend on how much they hurt for these 2 years. But one thing the caps will do will lock into place the idea that there should be no new spending on the climate. When, of course, we're in an emergency situation and we desperately need new spending on the climate. The precedent has been set, says Jamie. Speaker McCarthy is right. The cuts are historic. The deal means austerity for the long term. It is a huge Republican win, and a needless Republican win. Jamie is among those who know best that the platinum coin option could have been used by this administration. The deal, according to Peter Baker in the New York Times, contains important changes in environmental permitting, work requirements for social safety net programs, and internal revenue service tax enforcement. They're all gains for the Republican side. They benefit the oil and the minerals industries and wealthy tax evaders, bipartisan constituencies, though not the voting base of the Democratic Party. the, quote, work requirements, unquote, for SNAP will make life harder for some of the poorest people in America. What did the president get? An increase in the debt ceiling until the next election is over, at which point the game gets to be played again. Once more, as I said, the deal did not free the hostages, us. For this, Biden gave away the economy, us. For this, Biden gave away the following previously held point of principle. One, that the debt ceiling should be raised when needed without conditions. Two, that safety net programs and tax enforcement are good and necessary, and that domestic discretionary spending is not actually excessive, but should be at levels required to meet public purpose and national needs. If Biden is reelected, these gifts will hobble his next administration. If he's defeated, they set up the incoming president to use the debt ceiling to effect the full Republican agenda. How horrible that is beyond belief. All you have to do is look to Florida and to Texas and to see what's happening in those states. Were the concessions needed because of the gravity of the impending crisis? That is the biggest lie. Shared by both parties, Jamie says, repeated by Wall Street and amplified by the media, which loves a crisis and plays the public for fools. There was no crisis. The administration had multiple pathways under the law and the Constitution to diffuse the debt ceiling without giving anything away. It could have issued the platinum coin. The claim that the Supreme Court might have blocked it has been rebutted by Philip Deal, a former director of the Mint who drafted the enabling legislation. He said, as head of the Mint, quote, the fact that it can have $1 trillion denomination on it was absolutely part of the intent, unquote. To be fair, I have to recognize here that the Republican sponsor of the bill, specifically Mike Castle. Okay, thanks, honey. Has said in other contexts, okay, in other words, the bill might have been written by Phil Deal, or many parts of it might have been written by Phil Deal, acting as a consultant, okay, to Mike Castle. But from Mike Castle's point of view, okay, the $1 trillion coin wasn't a part of the intent of the bill. He has said so. I feel it incumbent on me to say that. On the other hand, the intent of a bill is not to be inferred from what the people who sponsored the bill or wrote the bill have to say about it, or at least that doesn't have the same weight as the language of the bill itself. What the bill says, the literal language of the bill. That language is simple, and it gives to the Secretary of the Treasury the power to set the face value on that bill. It is unqualified by anything. But going on with what Jamie had to say, or Treasury could have issued perpetual bonds called consols, not covered by the ceiling, because they have no principal to repay. It could probably have issued premium bonds. What's a premium bond? Okay, it's a bond which offers a premium rate of interest, but which has a lesser repayment of the principal. Okay, in other words, you issue the bond. Okay, it has a higher rate of interest on it, but okay, it has a lower principal value. So there's a gap between the price of the bond and what you have to pay back. And so this gap, if you keep on issuing the premium bonds, then this gap is going to lower the debt ceiling. So that's the way that works. But okay, Jamie says probably could have issued premium bonds. So he's not too sure about that. But both he and I are sure that consoles would be good. The platinum coin would be good. I don't know where Jamie stands on using the various grounds that were stated by Bob Hockett in his recent paper. But I do know that Jamie and Bob are friends, and that I'm quite sure that Jamie would find Bob's argument in that complaint pretty compelling. Okay, I know them both, so when I say that, I have some basis for knowing what they would think. It could have asked the Federal Reserve to clear Treasury checks with a zero interest unsecured line of credit. It could finally have let some checks bounce if it came to that, and relied on the big bankers, not to mention the outraged public, to whip Congress into line. There was no chance that a default crisis would fail to resolve in a few hours at most. So that's an interesting point of view. As I said, what I would have done in that situation was to tell Secretary Yellen to start issuing debt again. And don't worry about what the debt ceiling law says, that I, the President of the United States, will take care of that. It's not her responsibility to worry about that. It's mine. So I would have said something like that. The last point bears a few more words. Says Jamie, Biden has declared the United States has never defaulted on any debt. This is untrue. It is untrue. Yes. As an excellent recent paper by the historian Eric Toussaint points out, in April of 1933, Franklin Roosevelt abrogated the gold clause in all U.S. debt contracts, including public debts, by executive order, and devalued the dollar in terms of gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, while banning most private holdings of gold. This was a massive default. Creditors challenged FDR's action, and the Supreme Court found it unconstitutional, but only in principle. In a separate vote, the court found there were no damages, and the ban on gold remained in force until the 1970s. It devalued debts and affected a vast transfer of wealth to the working class. It was a key step toward economic recovery. Franklin Roosevelt was a fighter. That he was. The debt ceiling charade was a farce, but it reveals a tragedy. The tragedy is that the president did not want to fight. He did not want to defend any principle. He did not want to use the powers he had to protect and defend the American people. He did not want to stand with Democrats in Congress or his constituents in the Democratic Party. He wanted to be seen sitting side by side with the Republican Speaker of the House. He wanted to get the plaudits of the pundit class for, quote, compromise, unquote, and for reaching a bipartisan deal. Well, the president has what he wants. The speaker has what he wants. Let them defend the consequences, says Jamie. And wasn't that indeed a brilliant piece? I think it was. So moving on to my third piece. This one came from the American Prospect. It is called The Auto CR Dilemma. It's a great piece too. It's by David Dayen, who's been writing many things about the debt ceiling crisis, along with other members of the Prospect. But he's by far the one who has written the most pieces about the debt ceiling crisis during this period of time. He does this under the heading of today's X date post. The X date, of course, refers to June 5th, coming up upon us very soon. The auto, it's actually a week. June 5th is actually next Monday. The auto CR dilemma, today's X date. If the debt ceiling deal passes, the military budget goes up and IRS funding gets slashed. But if Congress doesn't pass the subsequent spending bills, that reverses. What does that mean? Here's, of course, a picture of the Capitol. The Capitol is seen in Washington early Tuesday, May 30, 2023, as lawmakers return from the holiday break to work on the debt limit bill. Since my initial rundown of the debt ceiling bill was published, we got the actual text of the president. Let's go through a few particulars that are new. Tariff changes are really a 5-state pilot project. Most states are not going to be effective. There is a small check scheme where states get families eligible for TANF using their own expenditures. That faces a crackdown, but not until 2025. SNAP work requirements have a phase-in. It's a very odd phase-in. Able-bodied, childless adults must work to avoid time limits on nutrition assistance. The cutoff moves from 49 years old to 50 within 90 days of passage, approximately September 1st, and then to 52 at the beginning of the fiscal year in 2024. That's October 1st. 1 month for phase-in, that won't cause trouble. The full change to 54 kicks in on October 1st of 2024 and then sunsets. That's already fiscal 2025, and then sunsets on October 1st of 2030. The permitting issue in this bill really is a nothing burger, according to Dave Dayen. The Builder Act, which mostly writes down things the White House has already implemented, like a single agency lead, better coordination, and a handful of page limits and timelines for environmental reviews, though they can be extended, is the main thing in here. A provision on interregional transmission lines is not only a study, it's an extended study that can take 1.5 years to write and another year to finalize after public comment. It's very clear that the monopoly utilities lobbied that provision into dust. There is an addition of energy storage projects to the FAST Act, an old infrastructure streamlining bill from 2008. So this is obviously Dave gave the bill a very close analysis before writing this. They added Joe Manchin's Mountain Valley Pipeline approval. The pipeline payoff, a new term I've coined, how do you like it, is in the deal, confirming outstanding approvals and stripping jurisdiction from all courts except the D.C. Circuit, which is thought to be friendly to the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I don't know if that's friendly. Some have taken this to mean that progressives were wrong to oppose last year's permitting bill, Since Manchin got what he wanted anyway without any trade-offs, this neglects that it was Mitch McConnell who torpedoed permitting because he thought he could get something better in the next Congress. He was right. Plus, the pipeline payoff is going to drain Manchin support for a permitting deal that gives something to both sides. See Dave Roberts on this, and he links to the article by Dave Roberts. AI environmental reviews? Question mark. There's a study commissioned on the potential of, quote, online and digital technologies to address delays in reviews, unquote. This is mainly about online portals as repositories of information and better tools to track uh, 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 progress, but it explicitly says the study is not limited to that. I immediately thought about AI. One way to accelerate the review process is to have Chat GPT write it, I guess. That will probably go as well as AI legal briefs. This bears watching. Dave says, I'm no longer worried about administrative pay go. This was the provision that codified an executive order that forces federal agencies to offset any mandatory spending created by their regulations by cutting other regulations. If it had teeth, it would be very bad, essentially baking in deregulation. But the agency can exempt rules from this requirement. The Office of Management and Budget could waive it entirely. There's no judicial review for any OMB finding, and it sunsets at the end of 2024. This may slow down a couple of rules, but I don't expect it to do much. I think that's really a key analytical point from Dave Dayan here that uh, okay, the administrative pay go may be making some noise, but there's very little substance to it. The unobligated COVID aid rescissions come to $29 billion. That's the approximation given by negotiators. In addition, there's potentially $21.4 billion in cuts to IRS funds coming. Officially in the bill, the cut is $1.4 billion, but according to numerous reports, the budget appropriators plan to steal $10 billion from the $80 billion in IRS funding in the Inflation Reduction Act in fiscal year 2024, plus another $10 billion in fiscal year 2025, and use that to fill in gaps in non-defense discretionary spending. It's possible those losses are going to be replenished at a later time. The COVID rescissions also backfill that non-defense discretionary budget in fiscal year 2024. That brings us to the automatic continuing resolution, which creates an interesting dilemma. As I explained over the weekend, the deal only creates top-line numbers, baselines for future budget appropriations that have yet to be written. If those bills aren't passed by January 1st, 2024, an automatic continuing resolution snaps in at the level of fiscal year 2023, reduced by 1%. This, quote, penny plan is the brainchild of Libertarian Representative Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, who sits on the House Rules Committee and presumably will advance the bill through the committee for that reason. But that auto CR treats defense, veterans, and non-defense spending far differently. Okay, Dave is basically suggesting it's unlikely that the plan for passing appropriations envisioned in a debt ceiling bill is going to be successfully followed, because the debt ceiling bill turns back on the appropriations process to regular order in something like 12 committees. And it's very difficult for Congress to work with that and to do things quickly. So he's thinking that they're not going to be able to pass the cuts which are envisioned here. And what's going to happen instead is that the funding is going to snap in at the level of fiscal year 2023, reduced by 1%, a very small cut. But as he goes on to say, but that auto CR treats defense, veterans, and non defense spending far differently. Specifically, it's much harsher on the defense and veteran side. Those buckets of spending were increased significantly in the debt ceiling deal. So if they go all the way back to 2023 levels, it's a much deeper cut from where they would have been. Adjusted for inflation, the cut to defense spending is nearly 10%. Let me show my work. Skip this if you don't like math. My sources include the CBO baselines and the bill text. Per Bloomberg's Eric Wasson, fiscal year 2023 discretionary spending was 1.602 trillion. The new baseline in the deal for fiscal year 2024 is 1.590 trillion. If the spending bills don't get done, the auto CR trigger for fiscal year 2024 is 1.602 trillion minus 1%, which comes to 1.585 trillion. So a $12 billion cut if the spending bill passes, a $17 billion cut if they don't. But under the spending bill's scenario, defense spending increases by 28 billion, while non-defense spending is cut by 40 billion, the 29 billion in COVID recessions and 10 billion from IRS funding in the first year mostly fills that non-defense gap. If the spending bills don't pass, you get a nominal cut to defense of 9.12 billion and a cut in non-defense of 7.88 billion. However, the IRS fund transfer, which is not in the deal and is just presumed as part of the appropriation, would not happen under this scenario. I don't know what happens to the COVID aid in this scenario. I guess it would just go to deficit reduction. Okay, you can come back now. He's calling to the people who have no stomach for the math. The upshot is this. It's actually only arithmetic. If Congress doesn't pass the spending bills, the military loses about 37 billion from what they'd otherwise get. A 4% nominal cut and adjusted for inflation, almost a 10% real cut. And the IRS would keep almost all of its funding boost. The trade-off is that non-defense discretionary spending would lose around $7 billion more, a little less than 1% in the scenario. Plus, veterans funding would lose a significant amount, probably around 5 to 7%. For additional context, non-defense spending got a major boost in fiscal year 2023, which became a new baseline. An inflation-adjusted cut from that is certainly not good, but we're getting one either way. The difference is less than 1%. In the no spending bills pass scenario, you trade a slightly larger cut off a high baseline for serious cuts to defense and preservation of the ability to go after rich tax cheats in future years. Isn't that something requiring serious consideration? Yeah, I think for me it is. It's not like a major news magazine didn't just release a blockbuster report on how badly the Pentagon is getting ripped off. Just curtailing routine price gouging would easily cover this cut, which we should be doing anyway. And even more important, the auto CR, CR is a continuing resolution for funding. It's what's used if they're not able to pass a budget. The auto CR would retain the relationship between defense and non-defense spending that has been severed by this deal. In the future, it'll be fine to increase military spending without increasing non-military spending concurrently unless the deal collapses. The whole thing depends on Congress not being able to pass its 12 appropriations bills. Doesn't that seem like a good bet? Congress is famously not good at such things. The House canceled a bunch of votes on the easiest spending bills last week because they couldn't find consensus. The point of this auto CR is to concentrate minds and get them moving to pass the bills. But if you're a Democrat who talks about how we have a bloated military budget and that rich people get away with murder from an imbalanced tax system, isn't this your big chance? And all you have to do is just not vote for spending bills. Every Democrat who does this makes it that much harder to get those bills passed and that much closer to kicking in the auto uh, by continuing by resolution, auto CR. If you ask me point blank, I'd say that Congress will somehow get those bills done. The military has contractors in practically every congressional district, making military pork barrel spending a jobs program for almost all politicians. And the fact that veterans programs would be clobbered too makes this a heavy lift. But to be clear, all that's needed here to trigger the auto CR is congressional incompetence. That's not exactly out of the realm, okay, of possibility. So these three articles really give you a review of this debt ceiling bill and how terrible, okay, a lot of it is, but also how even if it's implemented, it might not be quite as terrible, okay, as we think. This is in contrast to Jamie's article, which I think correctly points to the future implications of capping the spending and how terrible that is and how hurtful the bill is uh, for the poor people who are going to experience cuts. Okay, and for people having student debt as well, there are a number of features which this debt ceiling bill is terrible. Jamie, of course, was right to point out that there was no reason why this compromise had to take place. It only took place because Biden wanted to do this freaking compromise instead of doing his duty according to the Constitution, which, in my view and Bob Hockett's view, was to continue issuing debt and to raise the issue and settle the issue of the constitutionality of the debt ceiling bill for good. In other words, to free the hostage. Freeing the hostage was so important. Jamie's article points that out. Okay, the earlier article from Common Dreams uh, talks about quite a lot of the damage that might ensue from this bill, as does Jamie's article. Okay, and Dave Dayen's article, okay, is an evaluation of how the debt ceiling bill might be undermined somewhat. But Dave doesn't really focus on the moral aspects of the bill and the damage, okay, it does. But he does give a summary of the main points, okay, of the compromise. So that provides some perspective on the whole thing, okay, as well. So now I come to the end of my treatment, and Dee perhaps can get in here. This bill is bad, it is harmful, okay, it's hurtful. To go back to my main thesis, what I am saying is that we should do everything we can to help the people who want to overturn this bill and see that it does not pass. Now, many people may think that's risky and that is dangerous, but think about all the Wall Street pressure there's going to be on Biden and Yellen to use the other tools if this deal falls through. Of course, Wall Street will be putting pressure on Congress right now to okay this deal so they can be protected. I know that. But if we can overcome their pressure for the bill to get passed with our resistance to the bill, then the pressure from Wall Street shifts. Instead of being on Congress to pass this debt ceiling bill, it now shifts to being on Biden and Yellen to use the other tools to avoid a default. And politically, that is what we progressives should want.
Oh, I agree 100%.
So, okay, I think what we got to do is push. I think we should try to put together another force the vote effort on this bill. Not force the vote to pass this bill, but force the vote to block this bill. And I'm going to try to see what stomach the progressives I know have in the next few days to work up a Twitter effort to get a force the vote movement started.
Well, this administration is just so incompetent. And when we talk about misreading the room from my show, it's terrible. I mean, they misread the fact of the U.S. Like, the people here, what their needs are, misreads foreign policy, it misreads everything.
It misreads
And now we've got
everything.
the
It
second.
misreads, it also misreads the needs for the future. It's so
Exactly.
destructive in terms of the future.
Oh, definitely.
It's so destructive of the future. Uh, there's a dialogue here between Kay Ryan and others. Kay says better than no deal at 9:12. And she says it looks like it's going to pass. Well, I don't. Yeah, I would say it looks like it's going to pass because of the analysis I gave earlier. Okay, just sort of counting the votes of those who might be against it. And Peace Voter 2007 says, how many times are we going to say it's better than no deal? I'm not saying it's better than no deal. Oh, that's Madeline. Hey,
Yes.
Madeline, how you doing?
Oh, she stepped out
Oh, I'm
as
sorry
we,
she
as
stepped
we
out.
go on.
Okay, but I think Madeline is right, of course. I mean, I agree with her. It is not better than no deal. It is better to have no deal and force Biden to use his tools to avoid a default. And Madeline said, so tired of giving Dems a pass. Kay says it's better than no deal. Madeline says, no, it is not. You don't understand politics. Madeline says, excuse me. Kay says, you heard me. I do understand politics. I just disagree with you. Whatever, Kay says. There were ways around this. Peace Voter said, listen to Joe. If you don't agree with me, I'm out of here. Joe and D, I didn't come here to argue, says Kay. And Madeline says, sorry, I'm only reflecting what Joe says. And Madeline says, I will go. Don't go. Don't go. I didn't realize this was happening. Russell says, lost audio. It was on my end. Pardon that. Ghostart says Newswire Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to oppose the debt ceiling, 6:55 p.m. I thought she would oppose the debt ceiling, but I think it's important to say here, once again, to emphasize that it's possible, okay, if Hakeem Jeffries thinks he has enough votes to push Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden over the top on this, Hakeem Jeffries would be free to give the Congressional Progressive Caucus free rein to vote in the way they want. Hakeem Jeffries is good at counting votes. He's going to know that even if all the CPC vote against it and all the Freedom Caucus vote against it, that's not enough to block it. That's only 155 votes. He knows that. And he'll be counting votes among the established Dems also. So, okay, unless we do something and exert tough pressure over the next few days to torpedo this deal, I think it's going to pass. And that we have to concentrate on doing as much as we can to stop it from passing. Ghostart says, "Hi, I've been spinning my wheels, buffering. Oops, body blue, raised arms, face orange, frowning." Ghostart says, "At ST. I'm not sure what ST is, Steve Ghostart, but that's all right." So we still seem to have 4 people here, D. Don't know who those people are, but are you ready to say goodnight? Hello, D. Have you got anything more to say? So I don't know where D has gone. Hey, Russ is still here. Hi, Russ. How you doing?
Okay, I'm back. The dogs were singing here, so I had to put the mute button on.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Oh, the dogs were singing here, so I had to mute the button.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. Do you have anything else to say about this?
Um, like I said, Joe, you've got a good plan that we've got to try to block this.
I don't know if I have a good plan to block it, but
At least try.
yeah, it's all I can do is to get people excited about the idea of forcing Biden to use the other methods and to make
Right.
clear that doesn't risk a default because he can activate these methods fast. For example, he can have the platinum coin minted, okay, and credited by June 2nd. By June 2nd, that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
He can have Secretary Yellen start issuing more debt to break the ceiling tomorrow to immediately get funds into Treasury. Tomorrow. It will take considerably longer than that for people to file suit to try to overturn that. And when they do, they're going to have to prove standing. The Speaker of the House and the Republicans won't be able to directly go through the Supreme Court. They're going to have to find some people who were damaged by the United States continuing to pay its obligations. Who are those people who would be damaged?
I have no idea.
I mean, what are they going to do? Find in favor of loan sharks? I mean, really? Seriously? Is the GOP going to go in court and say, we're defending the rights of loan sharks? I mean, what the hell is this? So, I mean, I think there's going to be a real tough time, but meanwhile, lots of money can be flowing into the Treasury.
Mhm,
And I think it's going to be very hard, okay, for the Republicans to stop it. And of course, the ultimate thing Biden can do at the end of a long process involving the Supreme Court, because they'd have to go through the 14th Amendment, they'd have to go through the platinum coin, they'd have to go through consuls, go through all that. That's going to take months. But at the end of that long process, if they decide against everything that Biden can do and just tie him to the debt ceiling, he can say, no, you've made your
mhm,
decision. Now try to enforce it. That is the ultimate thing he can do.
mhm.
Just like Andrew Jackson did, just like Abraham Lincoln did, and just as FDR did in 1933. That's the final recourse. And frankly, I'd almost like to see that recourse taken, because I think that the Supreme Court's claim to the power of judicial review to be able to make binding decisions
Mhm,
on the other two branches as a result of this judicial review power, that is
mhm,
not something that was foreseen in the Constitution.
mhm,
That is
mhm,
explicitly in the Constitution, and that
mhm,
only exists today because the executive branch has not been resisting it. But I also think that Jamie Galbraith put his finger on it extremely directly when he said that FDR was a fighter. He didn't say Joe Biden is a caver, but that's what I think.
mhm.
That certainly Joe Biden is not a fighter, but I think Joe Biden is also a caver.
And, like I said, I think somebody else is running the show. There's incompetence, and I don't think Biden's, mentally all there. That's just my opinion.
Well, I don't think Biden is mentally all there either, but whether there's some one person running the show or a whole bunch of people who are running the show, okay, I'm particularly suspicious of Neera Tanden in this particular situation. She is a really harmful person in terms of bringing neoliberalism back with a vengeance. And that's what this deal does. That's what this deal does. It ignores the knowledge the MMT has been trying to bring to the world, and it just acts as if everything is all about taxing and spending, and there's nothing else, okay, involved.
Mhm,
Russ says, I think Joe is diminished mentally. Yeah, I think we all agree that he is diminished mentally.
mhm,
He was never the sharpest pencil in the box, but now he seems to be diminished severely mentally. If he can't figure out that this deal is bad for him and that uh, just refusing to obey the debt ceiling would have been good for him. I mean, look how strong he would have looked if he had ordered Janet Yellen to issue more Treasury instruments in order to avoid a default. He would have been hailed as a courageous president who was doing the right thing for the economy. If he had used the arguments of Bob Hackett in court to defend himself, the executive branch would have been hailed as brilliant And Wall Street would have been really, really happy because default was not only avoided, but the hostage was freed, so he didn't have to go through this crap again in 2000, okay, and 25. I mean, Biden would have been a hero if he did that. He would have been a hero if he minted the platinum coin. At least if he had minted a 100T platinum coin. If he had minted $1 trillion platinum coin, it would have been good for the immediate future, but he wouldn't have freed the hostage because they still would have done the hostage taking in 2025. I think only a Bitcoin would stop that. Okay. By the way, when I selected the Galbraith article for this program, was on the spur of the moment.
Hmm.
I saw the article. I guess about uh, 1/2 hour before I joined you, and I skimmed it, and I realized it was a very good article. I didn't know that Jamie had written it. Okay, at that time,
Okay.
but that gave it, of course, even more meaning to me.
All right.
So anyway, I rushed it in, and it turned out to be a terrific piece
Yes, it was.
for this show.
Good.
Okay, so thank you for coming, those of you who are still here, and thank you, Dee, for helping.
Yes, thank you for having me. I enjoy being here.
Okay, I will see you tomorrow, okay, with another show. I don't know if I'm going to do more on the neoliberalism thing or return to dump the corruption, okay, tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to do one or the other. Uh, and there may be something to pick up on the international systems front also. Something, okay, important happening. But certainly in Latin America, there are happenings that are very important, as
Hmm.
reflected in your show tonight.
Yes.
With the Brazil Venezuela rapprochement.
Yes.
Uh, I mean, that's wonderful. That's amazing.
Yes, I was happy to see that.
So that, okay, is very important. That certainly is part of the impact of the rise of BRICS and the fact that Russia is winning this war.
Yes.
So until tomorrow, I suspect that both of us are going to have very good shows tomorrow.
Yes, and we're gonna have to play it by ear what we see happening tomorrow.
Okay, we're going to have to play it by ear, but I think a lot is going to happen tomorrow. And of course, please visit my Patreon account at patreon.com, Joe_Firestone, and or my Please Buy Me a Coffee account, which is at buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. Uh, and please buy D a coffee as well. What's your coffee address, D?
Oh, my coffee address, buy me a coffee. I don't even remember it, but it has to do with the. Let me see. I'd have to go over there to see what it is. Um, Let me just go over to my show here. See, because I have it going across the bottom. I can see it. I don't know. We're spending. I don't think I can really. I can't really see it right now. I don't really know what it is, but
Okay, so please, um,
if you visit my show, you'll see it on my show.
okay, please visit the show tomorrow at 8 p.m.
Yes, around the world with Dee and friends.
Right. And my show will be on once again, okay, at 9 p.m. Uh, that is to say, the Empowering Democracy show. But at this point, I don't know whether we're going to go into neoliberalism again, or into the international system, or into dump the corruption, and into further tests of the Freedom Caucus. That'll be
Oh,
fun. Okay, good night, everybody.
yes, good night.
And we'll
Thank
see
you
you
again.
tomorrow.
Yes. Let me
Thank you.
get myself out of here. Leave studio.